Chapter 1271, First Look Reborn. It didn't take long for Caliburn to explain everything that happened to them during their trip to the parched lands. As for Trilla understanding it, on the other hand, that took a much longer time to consume. The best way that they could have convinced her was to direct her over to the Cthulhu roller coaster itself. There, she was able to see how the Lionhearts she considered family, the Lionhearts she was most familiar with, were completely different from the last time she saw them. Uncle Norrell, you've advanced to the 6th stage. And young Eros, how did you become a magnetic already? Wait, what are those weapons you're holding? It looks so different. Even though these Lionhearts hadn't been in the nation of Reborn for long, they had already been integrated into their society well. They wore their clothes, spoke their language, and even used their unique technology as if they were a local. That's right, young Trilla, this is a mithril artifact, Caliburn said, pointing to the new sword on his waist. It's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the perks of being a Rebornian. Somehow, he'd labeled himself a local. Was this the same Caliburn that she'd known throughout her life? One that refused to completely reject indulging in all the wealth that the Oscorp conglomerate gave him and only doing things for his own cultivation? Was this the same person? And in return, you've shown them the sacred eternal flame sword style, Trilla said, a little bit bitter. Even she wasn't taught that sword style. Caliburn then led Trilla over to the open field beside the nation. Here, there was nothing but mud and thousands upon thousands of soldiers marching in lines and going through obstacle courses for training. We're training them, he said. They need to be prepared if they want to become an upper echelon. Trilla kept quiet as Caliburn led her around, but deep in her heart of hearts she still wasn't convinced about the Reborn Company. Yes, they may have discovered the secret in order to get stronger in cultivation, but in her opinion that wasn't enough to earn the loyalty of the Lionhearts, at least not enough for them to betray the Oscorps and go against them. If what Caliburn said was correct and that Reborn's army had just been created recently, then they truly didn't have the capacity to fight against upper echelons, much less the conglomerates. The Oscorps won't outwardly fight them. She made sure that the Lionhearts exited out of the conglomerate through legal means, but that didn't mean they won't harbor negative feelings about Reborn. If they found out Reborn poached the Lionhearts, then this meant that they wouldn't do them any favors. They won't trade with them. They'll make it hard for them to conduct their business in Oscorp's territory. So it looked like Reborn wouldn't have a good time in the future. This made Trilla think, was it really a good idea to hitch herself to Reborn? Caliburn told her to trust them, but right now she was still having a lot of doubts. Finally, they arrived in the so-called train field. Trilla noticed that each one of these soldiers were performing the first form of the eternal flame sword style with perfection. 1,000 men all in a line of rows and columns, swinging their swords with flames emanating out of the edges of their blades. That didn't make sense. They'd barely been here for a few weeks. That wasn't enough to learn the strongest sword style in the world. And what was that they were wearing? Upon closer inspection, Trilla's heart suddenly stopped. These soldiers, they were wearing what seemed to be full steel armor, yet it didn't hinder their movements at all. That was because she knew that this wasn't steel at all. It was made out of mithril artifacts. No, this isn't possible. Her eyes scanned the entire battlefield. All 15,000 men were wearing the same full-body armor, meaning there were 15,000 mithril artifacts in their possession. As far as she knew, only conglomerates had that much mithril artifacts on hand. How could a lower echelon company come into contact with the rarest item in the world? Ha, I'm sure you'll be even more surprised when we visit the Dwarven village later, Caliburn said. Dwarven. But let's talk about that later, so how about it, what is your impression of Reborn? Trilla was speechless. She didn't know what to make of all these surprising things about Reborn. The Lionheart battalions were the same. They were unnerved seeing unknown humans and demi-humans using their sword style, thinking that they weren't worthy. But then, they saw them perform the first united form with perfect synchronicity, in a battlefield that would multiply their strengths severalfold. Then they finally saw the instructors. The Rebornians were not only taught by the Lionhearts but somehow also the knights from the order. Knights, why are they here? Why are they teaching them too? Caliburn laughed. Oh, that's because that old hag is here. Old hag, you mean the heavenly swordmistress? Yep, and she didn't want to get bested by me, so she also offered to teach Reborn about warfare. Tusk, she really doesn't want to let that kid become my sole student, ha 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 ha. Trilla couldn't get a grip on reality. Knights have somehow cooperated with the Lionhearts, with the sole reason being to teach the Rebornian army. Two of the most superior organizations when it came to swordsmanship were now having a joint project where they were teaching a group of swordsmen how to fight. What kind of cheat was this? Even conglomerates would feel a prick of jealousy when they saw this. The Lionhearts didn't teach the Oscorps, even though they were employed by them, and the Knights were famously prudish about their teachings, only giving them out with the condition of joining the Order. So one would either have to join the Lionhearts or the Order to learn from one or the other. But somehow, Reborn had completely navigated through that. Chapter 1272, Trilla meeting Michael. Wait, you said student. Caliburn flashed a smile towards Trilla, perhaps the most crazed expression she'd seen him do throughout the entire time she'd known him. Then he pointed towards one section of the battlefield. Trilla had to squint her eyes. Amongst the thousands of people on the horizon, the figures of two people were very hard to spot. However, that didn't last long. A large gust of hot wind blasted through towards her. It blasted through the entire battlefield. The Lionheart battalion were immediately uncomfortable. They knew that this came from a powerful sword. However, the Rebornian army didn't seem fazed at all by it. They continued on with their training as if it was normal. Trilla focused her eyes on the source of this hot wind. In an open space with nothing but a circle in the mud, she saw a tall human figure holding a sword with both hands. In front of him was a woman wearing a white cloth around her eyes. The heavenly swordmistress. She immediately recognized her, and from what it looked like, it seemed that she was teaching a student about swordplay. She took a student? Trilla asked, surprised. It wasn't any one of the Lionhearts, it seemed. Caliburn approached the two figures. Yeah, me too. Trilla's eyebrows raised. She didn't take Caliburn to be the master type. He was always too busy managing the Lionheart family to take a student outside of their lineage. Many important figures, like the conglomerate leaders, were quite dismayed by this, since Caliburn was known to be a strong swordsman on par with the heavenly swordmistress. But now he took a student as well. Who? Caliburn smiled, and somehow Trilla had a bad feeling about this. No. Yep, Caliburn finally entered into the training circle where the dark blue-haired individual was being trained by Eldia. How is he? Eldia shook her head. Unsatisfactory, she replied. Trilla's jaw practically dropped to the floor. There was no way. However, just by the fact that Caliburn and Eldia were talking and speaking to each other and speaking about the blue-haired individual was enough for her to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Uncle, you're both tutoring the same student. This was considered worse than taboo. Not only was it sacrilege against the tenets of the eternal flame sword style, but it was also considered quite dangerous. A student learning about two different philosophies in swordplay would, at best, be unable to explore the pinnacle of either sword styles. Or at worst, they would be unable to hold a sword again due to their sword heart experiencing too much strain. Yes, Caliburn said, nodding. I understand your concerns, but this is not a normal circumstance. This is special, he is special. Seeing both Caliburn and Eldia nod, Trilla couldn't help but be surprised. If they were this serious, then this must mean that this blue-haired guy was some kind of genius never seen before by this world. But when she looked at him, she couldn't help but feel a sense of disappointment. I'm tired, can't I go back home now? I've already swung this sword 10,000 times today. This supposed genius was slouching, and his posture was very lacking. Trilla didn't consider herself as someone who could be compared to Caliburn or Eldia or even Arthur. However, she was much better at swordplay than most people. And even she could see that this blue-haired man was not the most talented individual she saw. She felt like she could swing her sword and he wouldn't even notice it. This was the genius they were breaking taboo for. She couldn't believe it, she could. And just as she was about to say something, a protest, she was suddenly interrupted by someone speaking behind her. Boo to two, the supreme leader is asking for your presence. Trilla quickly turned around only for her to see an orc bowing behind her. When did he appear? Why didn't she feel his presence at all? But it seemed that Caliburn wasn't surprised by him. All right, looks like it's time for the real introduction, he said as he looked at Trilla. Better be on your best behavior, Trilla, you're meeting the leader of Reborn. Trilla couldn't help but swallow her nervousness. They. Trilla didn't know why she had to be nervous. The man in front of her didn't look to be intimidating at all. Sure, he looked young and handsome, but he didn't have the attitude and aura of those arrogant company leaders she'd been used to this whole time. She'd heard that the leader of Reborn was eccentric, but she didn't think he'd be friendly. Hi, I'm Michael. Trilla awkwardly accepted his handshake. Trilla Oscorp. I've heard from Caliburn that you're here for cooperation with us. That's great. She squirmed in her seat. Yes, Uncle Caliburn has told me that you could help with my current problem. Michael nodded. Yes, your family wants you to build a bridge in the chasm, am I correct? She nodded, and they want me to build it with haste. As you may or may not know, the other conglomerates are already posturing to try and build their own bridges in the chasm. They don't want to be last. Yes, well, looks like we can help each other after all. It was at this point that Trilla leaned forward. I don't think you've heard me. Conglomerates and upper echelons will want to build their own bridges. They will compete with each other. This means business. This means war. This means a lot of things. And we're not even taking into account the demi-humans guarding the chasm, or the resources it will take to build the actual bridge, or its protection once it's finished with construction, or its maintenance it so that people get to keep using it, or the politics that will happen with other companies wanting access to that bridge. As part of the Oscorp conglomerate, I have a little bit of protection from all that, but your company has no one to turn to. Are you still okay with this? Michael smiled. Yeah, why not? Chapter 1273, Alliance of the Big Shots. It was at this point that Trilla was truly able to see why people called the leader of Reborn an eccentric person. Even with all of those obstacles she just told him, he didn't seem at all bothered by it. It was as if he knew that he would be able to easily solve them without any problem. And the people around Michael didn't even utter a single complaint. They just smiled and made banter as if their leader hadn't just said that they were ready to go against the world if they had to. It was as if they were ready to go against everyone as long as Michael gave them the word. What is this kind of leadership? Trilla had seen powerful people before. She had seen her father command people through their respect, through fear, through benefits. However, no one was actually willing to throw down their lives for him. The Rebornians around Michael looked like they were ready to do it at a drop of a hat. It was at this point that another one of the shadow orcs appeared beside her, startling Trilla. BU-22, I have come to report something, Supreme Leader. The shadow orc seemed hesitant to say anything more, seeing as they were in the presence of other people, but Michael nodded, giving him permission to expose their knowledge. Trilla and the Lionhearts are now our allies. There's no need for secrecy here between us, Michael said. Once again, this was a point of shock for Trilla. Even her father, the leader of a top-2 conglomerate, didn't even trust his family with ultra-top secret stuff about their business. Not his wife, not his heirs, especially not them. We have found a lot of activity back in New Sparta. It seems that there are some companies posturing to try and break through the chasm before the conglomerates could create their own bridges. The Shadow Orc then laid out a 3-dimensional topographical map of the chasm, complete with the figures of humans and their respective camps littered around the perimeter. It showed some upper echelons gathering with their army. They looked to be making alliances with each other to try and defeat the demi-humans inhabiting the chasm. I'm willing to bet that some of those upper echelons are working for the conglomerates, Trilla commented, some probably from the Oscorps themselves. She knew how they worked. She knew that they wouldn't just put all of their eggs in one basket. Her father didn't trust her that much. He would have tried to secure the chasm bridges through other means, including paying other people off in order to make way for his conglomerate. Looks like it's time for our new army to test their mettle, Michael said. And after he said that, the shadow orc nodded and disappeared into a wisp of darkness to relay his orders. It was at this point that both Trilla and Caliburn turned to Michael. Young Michael, I do not think this is wise. Your army has grown incredibly fast these past few days, but they are still months away from being an actual, functioning army. If you try to deploy them prematurely, you're only going to endanger their lives. Trilla agreed with this. You're now dealing with the conglomerates. All aspects of their army will be above that of elite standards. They'll have better training, better resources, better armor, better weapons, better everything. Of course, Michael knew all of this, but even still, his decision remained. He didn't want to deploy his army, but he had no choice. He didn't want a war to happen between the humans and the demi-humans. Although the demi-humans were very skilled in defending themselves underground, it would only be a matter of time until the others whittled down their numbers. Day by day, more of the underground chasm was being explored, lessening the mystery and dangerous tunnels that the demi-humans used to gain an advantage. If this expedition to the underground chasm continued, even if it didn't succeed, it would no doubt create some casualties on both sides. He didn't want that, so he had no choice but to go there himself and hoped that he could settle a bloodless agreement with the monarch of the demi-humans. I really don't think you should do this, Caliburn advised. If anything, let us deploy our own battalions. Right now, Rebornian forces were divided into two. 15,000 men were made out of pure Rebornians. Meanwhile, about 30,000 men were from the Lionhearts. It was only logical for the more experienced and numerically superior battalions to be deployed. But strangely, Michael shook his head. No, we'll deploy our own forces. His insistence was quite shocking to Caliburn and those who knew him personally. Michael wasn't the impulsive type. He certainly wasn't the tyrant who would expect his men to sacrifice their lives for him. But by deploying his army like this, it looked like he was sending them to their deaths. If they were deployed to the chasm, the other companies would definitely see this as a challenge. Michael smiled at the two. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Meanwhile, back in the chasm, things had grown incredibly tense. Everyone knew that deploying their own armies into the chasm was a death sentence. Not only were they easy prey to the demi-humans, but they were also directly in the line of sight of other companies just waiting to plunge their knives on their backs. So they took solace in alliances. With bigger numbers, there were less chances of getting bullied and bigger chances of conquering the chasm. One side was controlled by the Goldstone conglomerates. They had gathered like-minded companies for this alliance, both upper and lower echelons. They promised benefits for all companies that helped their cause, like giving them free rein on the bridge that was to be built in the future. But of course, not everyone liked this arrangement. Why did the Goldstone have to control everything? So on the other side, a different alliance had gathered, one that was led by none other than the famed Vanderbilt conglomerate. Chapter 1274, Coalition Skirmishes. An alliance wasn't the right word to describe the Vanderbilts. They were using their own forces, their own resources, their own army. Unlike the Goldstones, they didn't ask for help from other companies. They were completely confident that they could conquer the chasm all on their own. And their boldness, their utter self-confidence, others would think that they were stupid. But who were they? They were the Vanderbilts. They stood at the top of the world with no other equal. If they said that they could conquer this chasm without the help of anyone else, then they certainly weren't bluffing. This kind of strength, the strength that disregarded common sense, the strength that didn't care how many opponents they fought against, it was something that gathered a lot of respect from other companies. So despite not asking for any help, many companies and organizations had lent their arms for the Vanderbilts. Some just wanted to curry favor with them, while some just wanted to oppose the tyrannical rule of the Goldstones. After all, once they controlled the bridges in the chasm, they would definitely levy a hefty tax on anyone who tried to use their bridges. Because of this, the chasm had become embroiled in a large political scheme. Although there were only two sides as of now, many knew that there were many ulterior motives between the different companies. Michael was having a lot of trouble trying to decipher the different motivations for each sides. "So, two conglomerates are fighting against each other," he said out loud to the group of shadow orcs around him. "But where's the other three conglomerates? Surely they'll want a piece of the pie." Naruto nodded before pointing to the 3D map in the middle of the room. "BU-22, the Hephaestus conglomerate has chosen to play both sides. They stand to gain more profit by arming both sides with their armors and weapons." That made sense. In a war, it was always those who outfitted the soldiers that stood to gain the most profits. In fact, the Hephaestus was doing the smartest move they could make. By providing both sides with armor and weapons, they gained a lot of money. And if either one won in the end, Hephaestus would still benefit from it if they had some kind of arrangement with either the Vanderbilts or the Goldstones. But Lord Michael, wouldn't the Vanderbilts get angry that Hephaestus was outfitting the Goldstones and vice versa? Truly, playing both sides like this was very dangerous. It could easily backfire. "They could play it off as the different heirs fighting against each other," answered Trilla. "The Oscorps and the Vanderbilts aren't the only companies having a succession war. Every conglomerate does. So one heir of the Hephaestus could side with the Vanderbilts while another sided with the Goldstones. On the surface, it would seem like it's part of the succession. But in truth, it could be that the main Hephaestus branch manipulates everything from the sidelines, benefiting from all sides." Michael guessed that Sinclair's elixir conglomerate was also doing the same tactic. Their pills and herbs and salves would become crucial in a war of attrition such as this. In fact, they may be the deciding factor. They could help human armies continuously recover while the demi-humans continued to get whittled down. Thanks to Trilla's insight as a possible conglomerate heir herself, Michael was able to understand their ways a little bit more. Things were a lot more complicated than it originally seemed. This made his decision that much more important. He had to strike a peaceful deal with the underground demi-humans before anyone else. "What about the Oscorps?" he asked Trilla. She seemed uncomfortable as she explained, "I was supposed to ally myself with the Goldstones. Then I'm expected to gain full control of the bridge once it's finished. An impossible task, of course. The Goldstones won't want to give this source of income away." Which meant that she was getting fed to the wolves, just like Earl. They were given impossible tasks, and it's up to them to prove themselves worthy of becoming an heir. If she failed, then her chances of inheriting the conglomerate would quickly slide down to zero. "I already know I'll fail this task. I've already forfeited my succession the moment I retrieved the Lionhearts from the Oscorps and allied myself to your reborn company. So I do not want you to simply let go of your men like this. You've never seen how conglomerates fight. Their wars are short, they are quick, clean, they decide the fight within moments of their arrival. That's how powerful they are. No normal army can stand a chance to fight against them." Sure enough, Michael had not yet truly learned the powers of conglomerates. But even if he knew, even if all hope seemed lost, even if they didn't look to be on the winning side after all this, he would still choose the same thing. After all, that was his life's motto, wasn't it? Letting all people of the world experience the same comfort as he did, he wanted to let those demi-human know that they don't have to sequester themselves underground anymore. They could live normal lives, beautiful, comfortable lives. So he was going to do it no matter what. It was just a bonus that he was well equipped to do so. One night, bells rang in the camps around the chasm as a skirmish between the two sides erupted. "What's happening?" "Someone from the Goldstone Coalition has attacked the Vanderbilts." "That's mighty bold of them. Don't they know who they're fighting against?" "That's the Levi Vanderbilt, fourth in line to be the heir of their conglomerate." Metal clanged as some of the soldiers began to arm themselves with their weapons and armor. They were soon stopped by their superiors. "What are you doing?" "The Vanderbilts are getting attacked. We're allied with them, right? We have to help." His superior shook his head. "Are you kidding? We are not powerful enough to survive a skirmish like this." The ground trembled in the distance as 4 meteors crashed onto the ground. Not meteors, humans wearing armor that glowed incandescently bright. Many would know this as nascent spirit armor. Chapter 1275, Arriving in the Chasm. Two different sides of the battle. 8 nascent spirit cultivators facing off against each other in the plain fields near the chasm. The people who would witness this battle would be unable to describe what they had just seen. It was a battle unfit for human eyes. Even magnetics who were already high up in cultivation would struggle to keep up with the speed and power exchanged throughout the skirmish. Powerful attacks, one that could cleave the very face of the earth just the way that the chasm had been created, was being thrown around like it was nothing. It was only thanks to their mutual agreement that they dared not to unleash their full strength. After all, if they destroy the chasm even further, it would only worsen the situation for everyone involved. So the nascent spirit cultivators from both sides simply tested their mettle through plain hand-to-hand combat. Their nascent armors glistened with an otherworldly glow. Each strike of their weapons caused the ground and reality itself to shake. Yet despite that, the armors they wore barely even got a dent. It was at this point that the human armies realized that they had absolutely no chance of ever joining a battle with nascent spirit cultivators. They could barely even keep to their feet with the tremors created from their clash. What more if they were in the thick of it? So this is the power of conglomerates. As expected, only the top companies in the world could afford to bring up multiple nascent spirit cultivators under their midst. And one should even take into account that this wasn't their full power. This was just the nascent spirit cultivators of the heirs. According to most sources, Levi Vanderbilt had around 10 nascent spirit cultivators under his belt, including himself. This kind of power was enough to rival even that of the best upper echelon companies. This was the insurmountable difference between them and the conglomerates. Just a single branch of the conglomerates could be equivalent to the elites. And opposite him was Teresa Goldstone. She only had 5 nascent spirit cultivators with her. However, she had smartly asked for help from her allies, allowing her to reach a stalemate against Levi Vanderbilt. The battle between the two didn't last long. It was only a skirmish after all. The nascent spirit cultivators didn't use their true strength, simply treating this as a good warm-up. That was why there were only 2 options for most: either curry favor with the Vanderbilts or hitch a ride with the Goldstones. Their armies were mere fodder in front of the nascent spirit cultivators. It's why a lot of people were quite shocked to see that a completely different army had marched in from the southern horizon. Early in the morning, scouts began to report back to their headquarters in the camps near the chasm. "Miss Teresa, we've just seen the presence of a new army marching in our direction." A woman with large, red curls going down to her waist listened to her scout's report with a raised eyebrow. "How many?" 15,000 is our estimate, the scout replied. "We have yet to determine whether they are Levi's troops or not." "How's their quality?" This was most important. Were they a threat or not? "They seem to be wearing full plate armor, no sign of wear and tear in their attires, and their weapons are all glistening under the sun. According to our assessment, the strongest among them is in the 7th stage of the body formation realm. No signs of nascent spirit cultivators among them." Teresa could conclude 2 things about this. One was that this group was well off. If they could arm all 15,000 troops with full plate armor, they seemed to be on the same level as the upper echelons in terms of wealth. And 2, they were inexperienced. The fact that their weapons were brand new meant that they hadn't had yet the experience needed to rust their blades with blood. So she could safely say that this army was probably from a newish company that was trying to cash in on the opportunities of the chasm. "See if they'll bite to an alliance with us." Now 15,000 soldiers wasn't big, but it also wasn't negligible. In a battle against the Vanderbilts, it was always better to be prepared and get as many allies as possible. "They're probably here because they heard that we're rewarding people with money just for going against the Vanderbilts." On the other side of the chasm, the leader of the Vanderbilts was told basically the same thing. "HMPH, another one of Teresa's spineless lackeys, I suppose, but it doesn't matter, only 15,000, and they don't even have nascent spirit cultivators. As long as they don't interfere with us, they're inconsequential." The Vanderbilts needed no allies. They were self-sufficient all on their own. but it helped to have willing volunteers who were going to weed out the fodder. Perhaps one of their supporters would deal with this new army if they chose to ally with the Goldstones. Michael arrived on the battlefield. He stood atop the chasm, looking down at everything under his feet. It was like looking at giant lips. The chasm was oblong in shape with sharp tips at the edges, and in the middle was the island where New Sparta was located. Both camps of the Goldstones and Vanderbilts were positioned at the western tip of the chasm, at the very edge where the lips converged, where the abyss was at its shallowest. This place provided the best entrance deeper underground. Controlling this piece of land was pivotal on who would control the chasm in the future. At the upper part of the chasm's lips was the Vanderbilts. Their camps were austere, militaristic, everything was unified under one banner. All tents, all garrisons, all buildings were made with Vanderbilts through Vanderbilt's hands. Despite having the smaller area, the Vanderbilts' camp provided the best defense. Michael peered down to the center of their camp, where a middle-aged man stood commanding an entire army. "So that's my uncle." Chapter 1276, New Faction Emerges. Michael hadn't heard much about Levi Vanderbilt, and he was willing to bet Levi didn't know about him either. His grandfather had many children. Michael's father was just one of many. The youngest, in fact. That was why he was the most obscure out of all of them and the one furthest out of the succession. In comparison, Levi was the fourth in line to the Vanderbilt throne. And according to the Shadow Orcs, Levi controlled the largest branch of their conglomerate overseas. He was in charge of the multiple companies they had controlling the entire world. A very important man, a very powerful man. Michael didn't even know why he was here. It seemed that the Vanderbilts put great focus and attention on the chasm if they were willing to dispatch the fourth inline heir to this place. They didn't even do that in New Sparta. He wanted to find out more about his uncle, but he decided not to overstep his boundaries. Levi had 10 nascent spirit cultivators under his banner. No doubt there was someone there in charge of their security and privacy. The Shadow Orcs were simply outclassed in that regard. So he had to just find out more about them through some other way, what he didn't know. For now, he looked on the other side of the field. On the southern lip of the chasm, the Goldstones laid in wait. Their camp was a mishmash of tents and structures coming from the different companies under their coalition. Michael even saw a few familiar companies there. They were a bit easier to infiltrate. Since the Goldstones accepted a lot of allies, there were good opportunities for the Shadow Orcs to do their magic and gather information. And according to what they found out, it seemed that this coalition was led by Teresa Goldstone, 10th in line to become the Goldstone heir, not exactly Levi's equal. However, she made up for it in her resources. She was in charge of most of the territories and real estate the Goldstones had in the royal continent. That was why there were a lot of companies that joined their coalition. They were hopping to leverage this for more territories. And if Michael wasn't prioritizing the chasm, he would have done so as well. Anyway, allying with any of these parties was unsuitable for his plans. They both wanted full control of the chasm. This included decimating the entire underground demi-human population. That's why he led his armies away from either party. 15,000 Rebornians marched through the fields, making their entrance as memorable as possible. The Shadow Orcs reported scouts around them. And immediately, he got a response from the Goldstone coalition. A messenger rode on a palanquin, intercepting his army on their way to the chasm. "Greetings, I am here on behalf of the Goldstone conglomerate. Rejoice, for we have decided to offer you our cooperation. Join our coalition and you shall receive rewards that will surely be enviable to anyone." Many peering eyes watched this scene from afar. Those from the Vanderbilts, those from the Goldstones, and even some eyes far away from the chasm, watching everything unfold from a distance. And as fast as the messengers arrived, they were turned away just as fast. Only the Goldstones were made aware of their answer. What are they doing? I thought they were joining the coalition. Maybe they'll join us with the Vanderbilts. But that doesn't make sense. They're positioning themselves right in the middle of the field. Everyone waited as the new army arrived at the very tip of the chasm and settled down. Behind this army were automobiles of great size, trucks, haulers. Each one was equipped with all the resources needed to create Reborn's own camp with the speed and efficiency that they were famous for. Before everyone could even understand what was happening, their walls were already erected. No way, there. They're making their own camp. How audacious, who do they think they are? Do they think they can fight against two conglomerates? Teresa was first to find out about Reborn's intentions. Her messenger had returned and told them that they rejected their offer. And when the messenger tried to counter, Reborn assured them that they wouldn't ally with the Vanderbilts as well. This meant only one thing: they were trying to build their own camp. It was so bold that Teresa refused to believe it until after Reborn finished their garrison camp. Reborn, so this is the infamous company that's got my mother so hot and bothered, she muttered to herself. Somehow, a lower echelon company had reached the ears of the main Goldstone conglomerate branch. This was unheard of. She thought that the rumors were exaggerated, but it seems that Reborn were every bit as fearless as they'd been known. Trying to compete with us with only 15,000 men, ever courageousness has its limits. Meanwhile, Levi Vanderbilt had the same thoughts. He found it utterly foolish for them to do this. What were they hoping to achieve? Did they think that the Vanderbilts and the Goldstones would fight each other and they could sneak in and reap the rewards? Low chance, if there was one thing he agreed on with Teresa. It was that they both knew to get rid of outside threats before anything else. But this could be a trap. Levi began to waver. That is possible, said his advisor. This may be a bait Teresa is dangling in order to get us out of our camp. You're right, there's no way that a company would be so idiotic like this. Leave them be for now. Only 15,000 men won't change the tides of battle so easily, especially with no nascent spirit cultivators by their side. Coincidentally, Teresa came to the same conclusion. This must have been a trap. And so, Reborn was free to establish their camp near the chasm. All those watching from afar were astounded. Somehow, a third faction had emerged in this war, one that was only made out of 15,000 men. Chapter 1277, Neglected Power. Michael was sure that the Vanderbilts and the Goldstones won't attack them outright. However, on the very small chance that they did, he always had his shadow orcs positioned somewhere around the perimeter so that they could inform them if an invasion happened. Thankfully, they kept their weapons in their own camps, no signs of aggression from both sides, yet. Of course, Michael didn't give them any excuse to try and attack them. He made sure to keep his army contained in their own garrison. Thankfully, they were fully self-sufficient, having their own supply lines leading back to the nation of Reborn seamlessly. Also, he had many defensive measures in place if an attack did happen. There were his drones, his Unity clones, and if worse comes to worst, he could mass teleport his army away from here in a heartbeat. Anyway, it seemed like they were safe for as long as they didn't step away out of line. The Rebornian Swordsman Division was extremely talented. They were able to pick up the Lionheart's teachings easily. Now, they were an organized group with discipline and order reigning over their every movement. Their movements became somewhat unified, allowing for easier instruction in the case of a war. Of course, their cooperation still wasn't perfect. They were still working on it as of the moment. And in truth, Michael would have liked to have Caliburn or the other Lionhearts helping them at this moment. However, it seemed that they were on a different quest than he was at the moment. According to Caliburn, the Eternal Flame sword style required more than just fancy sword swings and talent. It required an actual flame in order to sharpen the swordsman's attacks into the next level. And right now, the Lionhearts were on a quest to find that flame, whatever that was. Caliburn assured him that acquiring this crucial ingredient would be a tremendous help in increasing his army's overall power up to par with the conglomerates and the upper echelons. Much more than a few days of practice, at least. Anyways, the first few days after their settlement into the chasm were a bit lackluster. No one disturbed them. No one talked to them. The other companies were probably told by their respective conglomerate leaders to keep their wits about them to prevent them from falling into any traps. Because of that, Reborn was able to finish their preparations in order to fully integrate themselves into this place. Defenses were installed, spies were spread around, information networks were established, the works. That last one was important. Right now, they basically knew nothing about the chasm. It would be suicide for them to surge through to the underground without doing their due diligence. So they had no other choice but to keep it slow while the shadow orcs did their job. And during the 5th day, something did happen. On the northern horizon, a new group of caravans had arrived at the chasm. Many thought it would be another case similar to Reborn. However, the bright blue banners waving in the distance quickly disproved that. Scouts from both sides began scooting further forwards, hoping to make contact with this new entity of caravans faster than their counterpart. Unfortunately for them, Michael was first. High above, his mini drones were able to spot them coming a day earlier than others. And once he switched his perspective, he was able to see the mystical, starlight-infused banners installed atop the pumpkin caravans approaching the chasm. Twinkling stars with mystical swirls of magic, that was the emblem of the Guild of Arcana. Even from afar, he could see the wizards and mages wearing their signature hoods and wands at their sides. The Guild of Arcana, I've been wondering about them. Ever since the disappearance of magic, the entire foundation of the Guild of the Mystic Arts was completely upended and destroyed. Now, if this was any other organization, this would have already led to their dissolution. But the Guild was different. They were a pillar of the world along with the likes of the Order of the Heavenly Knights and the Conglomerates. How are they able to keep their power and influence despite losing magic? This was a question that had been at the back of his mind ever since, and it looked like he'll have a chance to answer that soon. At the very center of the caravan, a pumpkin carriage the size of a bungalow house floated forwards, ushered by no horse nor magical beast. It simply floated as if it was made by magic. Curious, Michael used his supreme talent to peer through this carriage. Was it made out of magic, of mana? Was he not the only person in the world who could still sense and use them? And the answer to that question was stranger than fiction. The pumpkin carriage was floating because of waves. Magic wasn't used to form reality, meaning no one had used mana in order to magically levitate this vehicle weighing more than a metric ton. It also was ability power. No threads were weaved through reality to change its physical properties. Instead, the mana particles in the carriage itself were being moved, like a boat bobbing up from a wave. If magic was molding a ball of water into a cube, then this was like touching the water and making the waves create the cube. How that was possible, Michael didn't know. Presence of a mystic master detected, ChatJK6 reported. He'd been so mesmerized with the pumpkin carriage that he completely neglected to notice the tremendously powerful magical source coming from inside it. There was a literal star inside the carriage. Such power. The presence of this individual was so tremendous that he was commanding the mana in the air to converge around him naturally. A 9-star wizard. It had been a long time since he'd made contact with a powerful mystic master. In another world, he could have been someone like this guy. Instead, he had neglected his own magical talent in order to pursue ability power. Chapter 1278, Arrival of the Mystic Master. Michael had always thought that ability power was better than magic. That's the reason why he had been focusing on his magnetic cultivation rather than his own magic cores. Simply put, anything that magic could do, ability powers could do better. Sure, magic was a lot more versatile as any wizard could simply learn magic spells and do them outright. Meanwhile, magnetics had only a specific kind of power that was based on their personality. However, ability power bested any kind of magic in the world. Even a first-stage body formation cultivator could change the properties of a 6-star magician's spell easily, so it would seem like becoming a wizard was useless. Michael was being proven wrong at this very moment. Somehow, the carriage was being levitated by some kind of power that was equal in influence to an ability power. How? Well, that was because it held a similar foundation to nascent influence. The very thing that made the carriage float was through some kind of nascent influence, without being a nascent influence. Michael had seen this before, recently. When Jakku was being taught by his two masters, he saw a brief instance where Eldia's power was able to overpower reality without using any kind of ability power. It was the sword intent. That was a power that powerful swordsmen like Caliburn and Eldia used to create slashes and cuts without actually drawing their swords. It was purely through their intent. He had then come to the conclusion that sword intent for swordmasters were equivalent to the nascent influence of magnetics. They basically both worked on the same foundation, intent becoming so strong that it would influence reality. If swordsmen have the equivalent of that, then this must mean that magicians have one as well. That was his hypothesis before, but only now was he provided with the evidence. 9-star magicians had some kind of powerful intent innate in themselves, allowing them to command magic even if they couldn't make contact with the mana in the air. Now things were starting to make sense. He always wondered how the Order of the Heavenly Knights and the Guild of Arcana were able to keep their power in this world, when it was clear that magnetics were the most powerful out of them all. He always thought that without ability powers, those two organizations should have faded off into obscurity by now. But they didn't. Even in a world of magnetics, they were able to keep their top spot as the two most powerful organizations in the world. And now they have arrived in the chasm. For what reason, Michael would definitely like to know. Levi Vanderbilt paced back and forth in his room. The Guild of Arcana, I didn't think they'd actually send a mystic master here. His advisors were a lot more composed than he was. Perhaps it has something to do with their quest of regaining magic back. This was a good hypothesis, but Levi quickly dismissed it. No, the Guild of Arcana wouldn't be focusing their attention here if that were so. They're here for something else, something that they'll need. And it was at this moment that Levi suddenly raised his head, realizing something. He immediately looked beyond his window, letting him see the vista of the chasm and the opposing camp on the other side of the lip. There he could sense the presence of a curly-haired woman moving about with excitement and vigor. Teresa. She wasn't acting surprised, she was expecting this. I don't know how or why, but Teresa must have somehow attracted the attention of the Guild of Arcana. They have something of theirs that they want, and vice versa. As expected of the resourceful Teresa, she was always making political moves, making alliances and such in order to better her position. Prepare a feast for us, we shall welcome the arrival of the Guild of Arcana. Perhaps I can find out what that sly fox is planning. Teresa couldn't be more overjoyed. Seeing the banners of the Guild of Arcana slowly approaching the chasm, she knew that her plans were slowly coming into shape. Now all she had to do was put on the charm and hope that she could entice the help of the mystic master visiting her. In exchange for a powerful resource that will be useful in the chasm, she had promised the guild a large clue about the location of Ersat's strongholds somewhere in the royal continent. She controlled most territories here, so of course she was able to sense the abnormalities of the pocket dimensions they used. And since the Guild of Arcana was desperate to undo the nascent influence that made magic disappear, they were quick to answer her call. Unfortunately, they sent her one of the most eccentric mystic masters in the guild. Lazarus Cadaver, a person who was infamous for his strange obsession with dead things. Some said that he had severed heads traveling with him in jars everywhere he went. Teresa shivered at the mere thought of interacting with a peculiar person such as that. But she had no choice. Lazarus had the resources she needed in order to finally start their expedition to the underground chasm, and she had to do it soon. Her scouts had told her that the demi-humans were acting more erratic as time passed. This was a variable that was hard to predict, therefore it was hard to plan for. Thankfully, she had another assurance. Lazarus wasn't the only prominent member of the Guild of Arcana that would be visiting the chasm. The tranquil blazing King of Fire was traveling with him. This mystic master was a lot more affable than the infamous corpse-loving Lazarus. And this mystic master had a good relationship with the Goldstone conglomerate, so she could lean on him in order to convince Lazarus to help her. And finally they arrived. She could already see the two mystic masters. One wore an all-black attire, Gothic, and the other wore a traditional wizard gown. His white beard almost grazed the ground. The venerable Severus Ogendor, let us welcome him. Wait, where is he going? Chapter 1279, Lazarus Cadaver. Severus Ogendor, the tranquil blazing king of fire, he was a mystic master that had lived a humble life. Instead of living overseas to further his magical studies and disappear off the face of the earth for years at a time, like most mystic masters, Severus instead spent his time as a humble tower master in an obscure magic tower somewhere in the royal continent. And a tower master's job often required a lot of administrative work, something that Teresa and the Goldstone conglomerate could easily alleviate. They had plenty of territories they could give to Severus in exchange for his services. That was why Teresa was confident that Severus would be on her side. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of heading straight for the Goldstone camp, Severus and the pumpkin carriages instead veered off towards a completely different direction, one that was far away from both the Vanderbilts and the Oscorp's side. Severus went towards the third unofficial camp in the chasm, towards the Rebornian side. Why is he going there? Michael didn't expect to see a familiar face approaching him from a distance. He would recognize that man no matter how far away he was. His long white beard that almost grazed the ground could probably be seen from a satellite in space. "Michael boy," Severus called out. The tower master stood in front of the gates of their camp. Behind him were the pumpkin carriages of the guild's caravan. "Severus, what are you doing here? Aren't you going to open the door for me, you brat?" Shadow orcs commanded their gates to slide open, allowing Severus to finally enter. A few wizards of high caliber followed the old mystic master, seemingly there to guard him. Their expressions were wary compared to Severus' light-hearted face. "By the heavens, you've grown." The last time Severus saw Michael, he was but a simple boy, but now he was 15 years old, just old enough to finally be called a man. The two were now standing face to face. Michael's growth spurt had allowed him to finally be at the same height as his old friend. "What are you doing here?" The old man smiled. "You're not going to be finding answers for me that easily, boy." It took a second for Michael to understand what he was trying to say. Once he did, he laughed and invited Severus to enter the camp. Once they were in his private quarters, Michael immediately conjured up a chess board for him to play with Severus. "You don't want to know how long I've been training to finally beat you," Severus said with a hint of madness. "I'd like to see that." They began their moves without any more waiting. The chess pieces slid with quick and decisive manner. Michael and Severus played enough chess against each other that they were already quite used to their moves. And even though it had been years since they had played against each other, Michael felt as if he was transported back to the king's region. It felt like things were simple again, and that there were no complex political and militaristic problems that were plaguing his mind. All he had to worry about back then was selling enough soap in order to jump-start the Reborn company. Now, although they were selling automobiles and phones at a commensurate rate, earning them hundreds of millions of sand dollars in a single month, the problems that he had to face had been also growing at the same level. It was nice to just focus on one single thing. All he had to do was pick up the chess pieces and play. He didn't know he needed this break. Soon after, their game entered into the end game. Their pieces were tied and their positions were both locked down. And a few moves later, Michael held out his hand. Severus laughed and shook hands with Michael. "Draw," they both said. It seemed that the Tower Master hadn't been doing nothing these last few years. His skills had sharpened tremendously. He would probably be granted the title of a Grandmaster of Chess back in his old world. "Ha ha ha, I thought I'd beat you after all that training and practice, but a draw is still better than anything." Before, he could only lose pathetically to a small boy, but now he was able to draw against a man who had gained the attention of the conglomerates. Oh, how times had changed, indeed. "Now that that's done, can we talk about why you're here?" Michael asked. If Teresa was planning something with the Guild of Arcana, he'd like to know. "I'm here as a favor to the Goldstones," Severus revealed. I owed them my magic tower back in Kingsbridge. As it turned out, the Goldstones provided magic towers too, not just real estate. That was good to know. I thought this was a burden, but imagine my surprise when I saw your banners flying in the distance. I immediately had my carriage take a detour to visit you. Michael took a sip of water. What does Teresa want from you? This earned him a nod of respect from Cerberus. So you already know Teresa. I've heard about her. Just so, from what I see, you don't have any intention of playing friends with her, and if you want to compete with an opponent of her caliber, then you would need to know everything about them. Which is why I'm asking you now, Michael replied. Cerberus couldn't help but inwardly smile. It truly seemed as if Michael had matured greatly. Teresa wants something from Lazarus Cadaver. He's the other mystic master with me. Michael did notice that the other source of bright twinkling power in the caravan was still in his large pumpkin carriage. He didn't seem to have any intention of getting out and talking to Michael. Wait, Lazarus Cadaver, where have I heard that name before? Retrieving information about Lazarus Cadaver. A few seconds later, a wave of information washed over Michael's head, making him reel back. Chapter 1280, Flustered. Immediately, Michael knew why that name was familiar. Lazarus Cadaver, he was the author of the book that talked about the Zephyr expeditions. His theories about why Zephyrs were the natural enemies of the elves gave Michael a lot of information that had helped him tremendously in his own research. Without him, Michael wouldn't have known about the dangers of the Elven Kingdom when he visited their islands. He'd have unknowingly walked into a literal minefield. He would have been curious and approached the Zephyrs, not knowing that they exploded upon close proximity. Why is he here? Is he here about Zephyrs? Michael asked him. Who you know about Lazarus? I've read about him, Michael told Cerberus about the book and experiments on Zephyrs. Cerberus nodded solemnly. So you know the reason why he's treated as the black sheep amongst mystic masters. His experiments on Zephyrs aren't exactly normal. Now, if he had just focused on Zephyrs, then that would have been fine. But he has also started researching about elves, going so far as to dissect their dead bodies. That's why those that know him know to steer clear away from him. Some believe that he had experimented on dead bodies before and made them reanimate. And before Michael could express his interest, Cerberus waved it off. Of course, it's nothing but hearsay, Cerberus continued. And Lazarus isn't as bad as the rumors say he is. He's weird but well-meaning. Awkward would be the right word to describe him, but he certainly isn't evil as most people depict him as. Cerberus went more on a tangent about how Lazarus' weird antics and about how he should be acting. It took Michael asking the same question for Cerberus to finally lock in and focus on the main topic. Is he here for Zephyrs? No, he's not here for personal business. He's here on official guild business. The Guild of Arcana has chosen him to become the representative for their negotiations with the Goldstone conglomerate. Teresa holds the deeds for a lot of territory in the royal continent. And as you know, magic has disappeared. We want to bring it back. And the only way to do that is to disrupt the individual who had casted the nascent influence. We believe that one of Teresa's territories holds the key to solving that problem, and she's willing to help for a price. Michael leaned in. It seemed that the guild had started their hunt for the ersatz. A bit late, he thought. What kind of price is she asking for? The ice petals of the frozen lotus, Cerberus revealed. ChatJK6 gave him a description of the item without any prompts. The ice petals of the frozen lotus is a precious material found growing in places where there is a lot of death energy. This particular plant is highly sensitive. The corpses buried around the plant must not be harboring any negative grudges. Michael now saw why she asked for Lazarus. Only someone obsessed with death could cultivate such a plant. As for what reason she wants this particular plant, Michael didn't know. ChatJK6 told him nothing about its special effects, aside from the fact that anything that comes into contact with it will immediately be inflicted with frostbite. Was Teresa planning on freezing the demi-humans underground? It was unlikely, and Cerberus didn't know either. Can I ask Lazarus himself? Cerberus sighed. You can certainly try, but I doubt that he would get out of his carriage right now. he specially made the pocket dimension inside as soundproof. The guild only ordered him to talk with Teresa, and ever the recalcitrant Lazarus intends to follow that rule to the T. This was not ideal. He could try and break through to Lazarus' pocket dimension, but that wouldn't be a very bright idea. Breaking and entering into a mystic master's personal quarters would definitely bring him fatal curses of some kind. But you don't have to worry, it's your lucky day, my boy. Just as I arrived here, I was given an invitation to partake in a feast within the Vanderbilt camp. I'm sure Teresa won't pass up an opportunity like this, so she will be there, meaning Lazarus will be too. Finally, some good news. Have you spoken to your uncle? Severus put that word in quotation marks because he knew the complicated relationships between Vanderbilts. I haven't, nobody knows about my last name, and I don't intend to change that, he said. Severus nodded, satisfied. All right, then I'll use my authority to invite you to the feast. You can act as my personal student. Then Severus narrowed his eyes as he looked at Michael's core. Tusk, you only reached up to the 5th circle, Michael. I was busy, Michael defended himself. With your kind of talent, I was sure you could have reached the 9th circle by now. Oh, what a waste of heaven's gift. Michael's cheeks blushed with embarrassment. This was perhaps the first time in a long time that he'd been flustered like this. Does that even matter right now? Magic is gone. Not for long, the Guild of Arcana is working on a cure for the world's affliction. No nascent influence is going to stop mystic masters from finding our magic back. Severus smiled, finding satisfaction in the fact that he had made Michael rattled. Haha, you were slacking off, weren't you, thinking you could just breeze through the magic circles because of your talent? Tusk, at this point maybe you don't deserve to be my student. Thank the heavens you refused my offer, right? Ha 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 ha. Michael pursed his lips. The old man was enjoying this far too much. And you better start practicing chess too. Maybe in a few years I'll finally be able to beat you, ha ha ha. It was at this point that Michael had enough. He conjured the chess pieces together and revealed that he'd been holding back this entire time. He purposefully had ChatJK6 turn off the difficulty in his brain by multiple levels. The wooden pieces began to levitate as Michael lectured Severus about what he should have done, and how many times Michael could have won. Say. Severus's eyes were wide with shock. You used magic. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. This is Jason audiobook, and I just want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you for staying all the way through. Whether you're listening to relax, to escape, or to dive deeper into these incredible worlds, your time and support truly mean everything. Every like, every comment, and every share helps this channel grow and allows more stories to come to life in audiobook form. You're not just listeners, you're part of this journey. If you have a web novel you'd love to hear turned into an audiobook, don't hesitate to send me a DM. I'm always looking for new adventures to bring to the channel, and your suggestions could be the next big story we dive into. And if you're enjoying the content and want to support even more, consider checking out the Patreon for exclusive early releases, bonus chapters, and behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you for being here. Until the next chapter, stay immersed, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story.